Hi, folks. Welcome to Wine Foundry Wednesdays from the Wine Foundry in Napa Valley, California. My name is Steve Ryan with the Wine Foundry team. I've got my colleagues here, Stuart Ake. Stu, can you give us a wave? Stuart.
Greetings, everybody.
Stuart, where are you today?
So I am in the center of Napa Valley. So it's the town of Yountville, and I am on the Yountville Crossroad, checking out the Sauvignon Blanc vines at Morgan Lee Vineyard.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Connor Burke, who is probably a new face to those of you that have been to the winery since January. Connor came to us. He's a few years out of Davis and just a few years younger than Patrick. But he is our enologist, and he runs the lab at the winery, and he's an all-around great guy. We really love having him on our team. He's been a terrific addition. Connor is out. Connor, where are you? Can you say hello? And
everybody. Yeah, I'm in Rutherford right now at G3, which is an amazing vineyard, probably arguably one of the most sought-after vineyards in Napa. But yeah, I'm out here in G3 looking at our beautiful fruit set.
You got the lucky assignment there. And then we've got your director of winemaking and everybody's fan favorite, especially in the state of South Carolina, Patrick Sabo. Patrick, how you doing?
Well, now you're going to be nice to me after you age shamed me. It's not very cool, but I'm okay, Steve. I'm a little bit disappointed by the age shaming that happened earlier, but I think with enough wine, I might be able to get over it. And so I'm just going to go ahead and move forward with the wine. And I'm just not going to worry so much about you hurting my feelings, I guess. So.
Well, that's how we've come to work together for the last 10 years.
Yeah, we're good. It's a good match.
And Patrick, where are you today?
I am at Hyde Vineyard in Carneros, looking at the Syrah. And what a beautiful spot. It's really such a pretty day. I'm going to put my microphone on mute as much as possible to try to keep the wind down, because it does whip through here pretty good, so we'll probably hear some of the whistling, but right now it's died down fairly well. So, and I'm excited to show you some of the fruit set on the Syrah.
And Patrick, can you tell us, I know where it is, but for those that aren't familiar, Hyde Vineyard, are you in Napa Carneros or Sonoma Carneros?
Yeah, good question. So Carneros, of course, straddles both. It straddles the San Pablo Bay, and half of it being over in the Napa, on the east side is in the Napa County, and half of it is over in Sonoma side. And so we're on the Napa side of things. So only 5 to 10 minutes or so away from the winery. So just down the street from the Carneros Inn. If people know where that is. And so it's in between the southeast side of Napa. And so it gets a lot of the coastal influence, and particularly the wind, as I am feeling currently. So cooler area for Chardonnay or Pinot or Syrah. And this is what we're dealing with today, the Syrah.
Thank you very much. For those of you that have not been out in the vineyards with us, we've done one session where we've been out in the vineyards before, and those guys are really braving the elements of cellular technology right now. So if they freeze up a little bit, let's just chalk that up to the nuance and quaint, fun capabilities of the Zoom world that we apparently live in now, and hopefully the audio comes through well. Patrick, for example, there was frozen where his face looked very aged and sun-kissed as well, but his audio is coming through well. So hopefully that is good. And if nothing else, if they all glitch out, then
would you say this is the terroir of Zoom? Would you say, is this the terroir of Zoom?
That's exactly
part of the.
That's exactly how I'd describe it. And I'm just really hoping that you guys aren't just stuck with me, because then I got to get into some dancing and try to figure out how to fill the next 40 minutes or so, which some of my friends in Baltimore that I see that are on here, they would definitely woohoo that one, I'm sure. But it would be a sad state for the rest of you. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Stu. Can you tell me what you're drinking? And actually, before I get into that, folks, the general idea here is that we're going to give you some information on fruit set, the growing season, trying to get out of the winery, out of our living rooms for the lucky few. But I want to talk about what's going on in the vineyards right now. We're in the middle of we're just at fruit set, and so we're going to kind of talk about the progression. And so Stu, you're at Morgan Lee Vineyard in Yountville, our Sauvignon Blanc vineyard. I'm drinking Morgan Lee Sauvignon Blanc right now. Can you tell us what you're drinking, which I'm assuming is the same, and tell me what you're seeing out there?
So you are correct. So I am drinking Sauvignon Blanc. I thought it only appropriate. And I am at our Sauvignon Blanc site, Morgan Lee Vineyard, which I mentioned before is in Yountville. Steve had said, this is fruit set. What is fruit set? So the vineyards go through different cycles over the course of the growing season. So early on, we have something called bud break. The vines are dormant in the wintertime, and then when the temperatures start rising, the sun's kind of warming up those soil temps, it triggers something within the vine, and then the vines wake up. And then we have some little green shoot growth. And if you've been following, either on Zoom or any of our videos, we kind of chart that. And then Patrick was in the vineyards a few weeks ago, and we were looking for something called bud break. And I lied about that. Actually, then we have, once the vines wake up, it's bud break. And then Patrick was looking for flowering. So each grape starts off as a flower. And Connor's going to talk to us about some of those things a little bit later. But once those flowers become pollinated, self-pollinated, because the vines are self-pollinating, then we have what's called fruit set. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here, get you off my pink puffy face, and I'll show you I'll see if you guys can see a couple of clusters. And you can see these tiny little clusters, and the berries right now are, basically a size of maybe eraser tips, but they're rock solid. Like if you ate one of these right now, you would be on a high fiber diet, which a lot of people recommend, but it would not be the most tasty thing. So that's kind of what we're seeing. Yeah.
Well, can you go in a bit closer?
Sure.
Without your face, just get right up in there on the hard berries.
It might necessitate me putting down my wine glass. That's going to make me a little sad, Steve, but let me see if I can get in here and get the shade. And I'll kind of point with wine glass and finger. So if you can kind of see these, the little clusters here, by comparison, here's my finger, here's the cluster. So literally they're about the size of my thumb right now. And again, those berries are, it's almost like rocks. It would wreak havoc on the teeth and on the belly.
So, and Stu, why are they so hard right now?
Okay, so basically, I'm going to say it's in some ways it's a defense mechanism. The berries they don't have the maturity to reproduce yet. And so, as we know, the goal of a vine is to try to reproduce. They want a bird or an animal to come by and eat one of those ripened berries, chomp, 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 and then deposit the seed somewhere else, right? But since the vines aren't mature enough yet to actually do the reproduction, it's almost a defense mechanism where they're not going to ripen up until the very end. And then it's this sprint. And Patrick will get into that in a little bit, but I hope that makes sense. So right now, the berries are set. They look like grapes, but they're tiny. And when we take a look at the Cabernet with Connor, and we take a look at the Syrah with Patrick, you're going to see that the color on those grapes would be very different than one might think this time of year.
And Stu, are you seeing clusters forming that are pretty uniform out there in Morgan Lee?
Yeah, so really good question.
Thank you.
We are in
Your
kind of
validation is so important to me.
Most of your questions are terrible, but that was a good one, Steve. So thank you. Actually,
Gold.
I don't want to. It's still early in the growing season, so I don't want to cross Mother Nature. Not that I'm superstitious, but I am a Chicago Cubs fan. It's actually, it's a very even fruit set. It'll be interesting when we talk with Patrick, who's in Carneros. He mentioned the wind before, and Connor will talk about that. But if you can, I'll try to come in again, and I apologize for my, I have a master's degree in cinematography. I don't like to brag about it too much, but the clusters are very uniform. If you can kind of see that.
They look pretty big too. They look like those
right.
they're going to end up being those football-sized clusters.
I don't know about football size, but Sauvignon Blanc can be pretty aggressive. And the way that Morgan Lee farms, these vines are on the valley floor, so they tend to they have really nutrient-rich soils. But since the family farms kind of old school, very low intervention, the grapes that are on the vine are pretty darn happy. But yields can be very, each vine is going to have very, very different yields. And it's just their philosophy of farming. It's about a more low intervention, let the grapes speak.
Perfect. Thank you, Stu. And I'm going to, as a reminder for those on the, joining us for our Wednesday night special show here, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We've got our colleague Valerie managing the chat, so if you can also throw things in there as well, or if you just want to say hi to folks. But the Q&A is what I'm kind of monitoring to be able to feed questions to these guys while they're out there. And I'm gonna switch gears to Connor the Merkin Birkin over there in Rutherford, and who currently on my screen is totally frozen, but it looks like he's giving everybody a big hug.
Nice.
So Connor, I'll ask you, kick it off. Can you tell us what you're seeing there at G3 in Rutherford?
Yeah, so I'm seeing some like really nice full clusters. We're gonna try and zoom in onto them. Let's see, but yeah, just nice, even fruit set. We're not really seeing a lot of shatter, which shatter is basically just when berries don't get pollinated. And there's a few factors that can lead to that. And the big one's weather. There's kind of like a 10 to 14 day window after bloom whenever, all the grape growers are really panicking, just hoping for great weather. And the big things are wind, rain. You can even get some hail out here, which would be really crazy and just kind of devastating to the fruit crop. But, this year it looks great, and I can't even really find an example of a cluster that has some shatter on it, which is great.
We'll probably be able to find that in Patrick's vineyard with the kind of wind tunnel that is Carnero. Oh, now we have a new view of Connor looking very, very, very lovingly at the clusters. This is perfect. So Connor, you mentioned hail. That's something that we fortunately in California, at least in Northern California, don't really have to deal with too much. It's kind of a freak thing, but for those Burgundian fans and Bordeaux fans, they've really gotten hit with it hard. Many of the past few vintages here and there. Stu, you follow that a bit as a big fan of Burgundies. And can you talk a little bit about maybe a little more in depth on what Connor was touching on as far as flowering to fruit set and where shatter comes in and how those weather effects can jump in there?
Yeah. So, and then I'll show you a cluster because it took a little bit of seeking, but I did find one cluster with shatter. So, we're pretty fortunate here in the Bay Area. Yes, we've been dealing with fires in recent vintages, but we haven't been too impacted, with the exception of the rest of the valley in 2017. So, but during these critical growing periods, Connor referred to as flowering, that tend to basically about 2 weeks where the vines are going to self-pollinate, right? We don't need bees, we don't need insects, and then we don't really want wind, rain, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But other parts of the world, Burgundy, pretty tempestuous weather, the Rhone. You might have heard of something called the Mistral, like these winds that come flying through southern France, and Bordeaux, where they can also have a lot of hail, and that can disrupt that cycle. And you get these, it's called shatter, or chicks and hens, some fully developed berries and underdeveloped berries. But I'm going to say it's not the end of the world. It's bad for growers, but for us, Connor probably doesn't care about it. Patrick probably doesn't care about it because it reduces the yield and more concentration.
So basically, to kind of sum that up, if there is shatter, the quality, it's the farmer's going to harvest. That sound right, Connor? You can nod. I see you're on mute. That's okay. All right. Perfect.
I don't even know my nod, but yes.
No, yeah.
That was perfect. Yeah.
No, that was good. So Connor, we've got a question here, Connor. Sorry. This is from Paul in Minneapolis, and he is asking, pull it back up. If it were to rain right now, what will that do to the grapes or the fruit set? I'm not sure on the technology. What will that do on the?
It would not do much damage. It's kind of that there's a 2-week period right after where it rains, decrease your pollination amount, and so now we're pretty much set. The fruit set is complete, so now it would just be a little, extra water.
Yeah, so I'm gonna summarize that a little bit. Sorry for the technology a little bit. I know that was a bit glitchy, but basically what Connor's saying is that the real fragile part is that 10 to 14 day period between flowering when the vines are pollinating themselves, as they are hermaphroditic, and going into fruit set. So now that the fruit is set, that's how we can tell what our yield's going to be, and everybody's gauging that. And so if rain comes, it's really just washing away dust, creating mud. For those of us that drive a hybrid, making it more difficult to go out and see the vines. That's really the kind of downside of the whole thing. But I'm gonna bounce over to Patrick, and I'm also gonna acknowledge Jeff from Firewater Wines, our friend Jeff Riley. Thanks for the question, Jeff. We will touch on that in a little bit for sure, because Patrick's gonna kind of get into a little bit about what he's seeing at Hyde Vineyard, and then we'll talk a little more about next steps in the growing season. So Patrick, what are you drinking? And tell us what you're seeing.
I'm drinking Syrah, of course. Why wouldn't I not be if I'm in a Syrah vineyard? So, yes, right this second, actually, the wind has died down, but, there likely will be a little bit of wind noise here because it is in Carneros. Afternoon winds between 2 to 6 p.m. are significant, whether you're on this side. I live over in Petaluma, still in the western Carneros, if you will, and it's still similar. Afternoon winds can make for kind of a little bit of a shutdown, also a cooling off, which the vines, particularly cooler climate varietals like Syrah or Chard or Pinot, really do benefit from. And so here, if we can, I wanted you to see we have a really good fruit set actually.
So Patrick, you're pretty
cooler climate variety, especially.
You're pretty frozen, so I was gonna say if you're moving around, maybe go real slow. And we'll
I'm not moving. I'm just frozen. That's a difference.
I think have you been drinking heavily, Patrick?
You know what? You do know me, Stuart, and I do like to. I want to be safe. I want to be hydrated. I say let's just call it hydration. So I'm going to go really slowly, Esteban.
Thank you, my friend.
So I don't know if it's easy to see or not because of the shadows, but Syrah is slightly more oblong of a grape than Cabernet Sauvignon is, and/or Sauvignon Blanc. So the grapes tend to look a little bit oval or ovoid. And so if you look in between here, you can see some of, again, I can't really tell if I'm looking a very good job at it or not, but where there's some that are larger grapes, and you see in between some of the spots, and you might be it's in the shade, where there's not a very good in this case, where there's one spot would be a flower that didn't actually form. So they shatter is when the wind, or typically wind or rain or some other event, takes the pollen, does not pollinate the flower there, so that you end up having an open spot essentially in the cluster. So there are a number of spots, and that actually is not a terrible thing for help spacing out some of the cluster to reduce some of the potential mold that might happen later on. The pressure for as the grapes grow and enlarge and they start forming together and touching each other, and then that's where likely, if you're going to ever get mold, is when grapes are resting against each other, and you see some more likelihood for powdery mildew or other problems down the road. So some shatter, as a buyer, if you're a grower, you want to have every grape or every flower become a grape because you're looking for maximum weight. But if you're a buyer, like we are, we're looking for maximum concentration. And so we actually want the grapes to be the most. So a little bit of reduction of yield is not a terrible thing, I'd say, on the buyer side of things in general. So I see very little shatter or very little hens and chicks, as Steve mentioned earlier, or Stu mentioned earlier. That's when you get small berries and larger berries. And so some of the winemakers would refer to that as hens and chicks berries. And so it's a little bit of that here, but it's relatively minor. And so the set's pretty good. So if anything, I don't think that's going to be a terribly low crop year. It doesn't look as high as it has been in 18, but it's probably comparable more to the 19, to a moderate
19.
yield. And very, Hyde Vineyard's a well-known vineyard. They do a really nice job at farming. So everything is spot on as you expect at this point, as far as spacing, as far as the growth overall. If you look at the size of the vine, still relatively small canopy. You have maybe a 1 to 2 feet of canopy, and you already have grapes. So what that shows you is that you're not getting a ton of vegetative growth. And so we're really kind of focusing in. The vine is going to focus in on the reproductive growth, which is where we get all our concentration from. So I expect a medium to full body Syrah from this fruit, and really nice concentration of tannins and fruit. So I'm excited to see the early results. Do we want me to answer Jeff's question now, or should I wait till later when we get a little farther on?
I think it comes kind of physiologically down the road, so
okay.
So we can stay on it. But it's nice to see you again. You're no longer frozen, and we can see it. So Patrick,
that's fantastic.
That's fantastic for all of you out there. That's fantastic.
Lucky you.
What comes next? So we have these benchmarks of bud break, flowering, fruit set. What's coming up next?
So the next is, so the couple things that farming wise you're going to do. The next major thing is veraison. Okay, so that's when the grapes actually turn color. So now, as Stu mentioned, the grapes are very hard. Okay, so think of all the acidity and the sugar levels are very, very low to none. And the acidity levels very, very high, all acid and no sugar. So what's happening is that, as Stu mentioned, as I fall apart, as Stu mentioned, the goal of the grapevine, the vine still, quote unquote, thinks that it reproduces via the seed, right? The seed is the most important thing to the grapevine. So the vine is trying to make the seed viable, and so that it can be replanted somewhere else and grow. So zero, right, by the way, zero, for all of you that don't know, zero wine vines are propagated
planted
via seed. 100%, not a small amount or a large amount, all of the amount, 100% are done via cuttings. So no grapevines, wine grapevines, are planted or reproduced via seed, but the vine still thinks that it is doing the seed. So the goal is to make the seed mature. So in order to get for ripe, it has to do all these things inside internally to make a seed ripe. And so, and then later on, it's going to make the seed more attractive by covering it around sugar. So right now, the vine, so the animals won't eat the grapes. They want the vine as make the grapes very acidic and bitter, so that because the seeds are not ready to be transplanted yet. And so the vine, so if you taste the grape now, it's all bitterness, all acidity,
and and astringency. And so it's super acidic, super astringent, and super bitter. All of those things, which is not a great combo. And much later on will be much sweeter, much less acidic, much less astringent, and so and much less bitter as well. And so the question is, or for the vine, is when is it ready? So we're still 4 months away from the vines, the seeds being ready. And so several things have to happen internally in the grape to make the seed ready and to make the animals more likely to eat the grapes in order to transplant the seed. So that's where the vine still thinks that's happening. But yeah, it's been a long time since that's actually happened that way. But that is nature's understanding of what's happening.
So you mentioned Verizon, which is going to be, we'll do a separate episode on this in most likely August or late July, something like that. When we get to that point, yeah. And so how will it differ? And I'll throw this over to Stu or Connor, whichever one of you guys wants to jump into it. How will that differ between the 3 different vineyards you're in, where you've got Syrah and the Cabernet, where Connor is probably going to be maybe along the same lines, but then Stu has this white wine grape. So how will that kind of differ? And whichever one you guys wants to assert yourself first, go for it.
Connor, you want to grab it?
I'll pass the mic to you.
I've got 2 turntables and a microphone out here in Morgan Lee Vineyard. So, so we have a few things that are going to happen. So Steve used this term called veraison. Patrick used this term called veraison. And that is when, I guess, can we say like an enzymatic change is going to happen within the vine. And the vine is going to stop focusing in on its green growth. Well, it's going to be doing that a little bit earlier, but the photosynthesis, and let's get that fruit mature, okay? And Patrick will kind of talk about this thing called hedging and something maybe called green harvesting in a minute. But the vineyard I'm at, not my vineyard, but the vineyard I am at is probably going to undergo that change first, because each grape has its kind of own internal clock. And Sauvignon Blanc tends to ripen earlier than Syrah or Cabernet Sauvignon. And so in probably 4 weeks, 3 weeks here, these grapes, as you saw, they're starting to get a little big, but they're still kind of only the size of like a eraser tips, essentially. They are going to go through that veraison change. And then I haven't worked with Hyde. I've always wanted to work with Hyde, but I expect that Hyde will probably come next. And then Connor's Vineyard, G3 in the heart of Rutherford, known for rich, opulent interpretations of Cab, that will start to undergo that change, that veraison change. But Patrick, we are going to help trick those vines to get more uniformity. What can you kind of talk about hedging a little bit, or just why would we drop any? These grapes are amongst the most expensive on the planet. It's apples and oranges compared to the grapes you buy in the grocery store. We're looking at $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 a ton here versus a couple $100 a ton. Why would we drop these grapes? And then why do we hedge the vines?
So interestingly, good questions. Interestingly, we're actually in 3 vineyards that we really don't actually do hedge the vines, but most of the time, the problem is, that's all cool. The reality is that here in the New World, we have a lot of vigor, okay? In general, most sites, even mountain sites sometimes, especially valley floor, can be quite vigorous. So the vine will continue to grow vegetatively for a long period of time, and needs to be signaled sometimes manually via intervention to shift all of its weight, as you mentioned, over towards the reproductive side of things. And so the vine is, the whole time it starts growing, it's going to be, photosynthesis happens from the start when you have any green growth. where they send the resources, the carbohydrates from the photosynthesis, is generally earlier on done towards growth, towards the tip of the vine, towards which would give the vine more resources, right, and more be able to absorb more things. And so, to a point, the vine needs to do that. Then, at some point, usually, I said, roughly, it could be a month or so after fruit set, the vine, it's about the time for the vine to kind of say, okay, this is enough vegetative growth. Now I need to shift all my emphasis towards the fruit. And so again, the vine actually is shifting its emphasis towards making the seed mature. And we like the fruit, of course, and we use the seed and the fruit. But the vine itself, the goal is not to make the fruit mature, it's to make the seed mature. And so, but in order to do that, it has to make the fruit attractive, and in order to make the animals want to take the seed. And so we are the animals in this case. And so we are looking for the right amount of ripeness for the fruit and of all the flavors. So veraison is the time when the vine kind of shifts from the vegetative growth towards reproductive growth. So what happens is inside the vine, inside the grape, the grapes start thinning out, the acidity levels drop significantly, the sugar levels start to increase, and the seed starts to ripen, starts to lignify, starts to harden and wooden, and turn brown and become viable to plant in theory. And so again, that's what the goal of the vine is, to try to make that seed viable. And so by hedging, what we do as farmers is to help the vine, signal to the vine, like, all right, look, sometimes the vine doesn't, because again, our conditions are so ideal here in Northern California, particularly, that it is hard to know when there's a drastic shift in the weather, or there's no outward huge obvious sign to the vines to like, this is time to start shifting, So what I used to think, but actually when I moved out here, that we were just trying to make all the vines look pretty and hedged and look really nice. It does look nice and even, but the reality is that you're actually injuring the vine in an effort to signal to the vine that now it needs to shift its weight towards the fruit. And so the hedging is a manual, human intervention to help kind of push the vine along, like, all right, now move your go this direction. And so that's really what the hedging is done. It also helps to open up and even things out. The reason why you would want to plant a vine, along, as you see, but people have been out to the wine country, or not only Napa, but also around the world, you notice that the things are grown very kind of horizontally and splayed out to be more even. The reality is to try to even out, so the sun is even across the vine, all the resources are kind of shared evenly across the vine, and
Well, it looks like maybe we lost Patrick there for a moment. And I swear to God, Patrick, I did not cut you off, only because you were taking up all the oxygen in Napa Valley. All right, had to do it. You won't know until you watch the recording of this anyway. So anyway, Stu, I'm going to kick Jeff's question over to you, which he admits, it might be a little premature, but when we talk about sugar content and what else we look for in determining a harvest date, you want to go ahead and take that? We will cover that, Jeff, just so you know, down the road as we approach harvest. But Stu, you want to go ahead and answer that?
Sure. So in the coming weeks, once we see the veraison, and it's going to be really cool where Connor is and where Patrick is, because you'll see one purple berry and then the rest will be green berries. And then 3 days later, a quarter of that cluster will be purple. And then eventually once like we're through veraison, then it becomes kind of like a race to harvest. And we can almost, Mother Nature's gonna be throwing curveballs and stuff like that. But we'll Connor, Steve, Patrick, myself, we'll be going out to the vineyards and getting cluster samples every few days as we start getting closer and closer to harvest. And it's not just the chemistry. And this is something that Patrick always stresses. We got to taste the berries. And so we'll be tasting the berries, and then Connor will taste the berries in the lab, and then we'll smush those berries up and start running them through the through the FOSS, which is our machine which analyzes a number of things, but acidity and the nitrogen available to the vines. And so then we'll start being able to get a better sense of when we're going to harvest. But it's not about chemistry, it's about flavor. But being out here today is today June 23rd, is that right?
It's actually, that was yesterday. Today's the 24th.
Leap year gets me every time. So I'm going to say for this vineyard, September 4th. I'm just tossing it out there right now. Just let me just double check here. September 5th. I'm going to modify.
Right,
I'm going to modify my answer just a little.
I'm definitely holding you to that.
Yeah.
Well, the best thing that we've got here, and to round that out, Jeff, it really, simple terms, benchmarks and chemistry. You have a range in bricks, you have a range in acidity, but what Stu's trying to say is that it all comes down to the phenolic compounds and flavor. And so that's where you rely on your winemaking staff quite a bit to kind of really have the I guess that's more the art of it and the experience of it as opposed to the science. And so people say there's an art and a science to winemaking. The science is the numbers, all of that, which is all great, very well founded. I studied science, Connor studied science, but the art is actually the experience in doing it. And that's why when you work with vineyards year after year after year, you get better and better and better results. Even when some would consider it an overall down vintage, you're going to get better results the longer you work with it because you're more familiar and you have all of those. And without getting too much on that, we will kind of push back to where we are now. So I'm gonna ask you, Connor. And by the way, we've lost Patrick. His phone died. He is a very busy man and apparently very much in need, and his phone must vibrate all day long. So now we all know the magic way to get him to be quiet. We unplug his phone. So there we go.
Steve, I heard that.
Oh,
that's not cool. That's not cool. That wasn't cool, man. You can start my video. If you would start my video again there.
I got so busted.
You're
That's
totally
amazing.
busted, yeah.
That's amazing. All right, I'm bringing you back.
That wasn't cool.
He's back.
No, I'm in the car.
What kind of vines are those? What kind of vines are those?
These are really well known. Everyone knows about the Mercedes vines. Those are
the Mercedes vines.
They're German, and so it's obviously high.
Well, Patrick, welcome back. We miss you terribly.
I was talking, and then Steve, you went quiet, and I was surprised. I thought you cut me off, and then it was me. I died. I'm sorry. Too much blending, not enough charging on my phone, apparently.
That's okay. I did say you're very much in demand, and your phone must vibrate all day long because you have a lot of people. You're a very important person. So Connor, I'm gonna jump back to you here because you look like a little hobbit crouched down in the vineyard there.
Totally.
Can you? It looks like quite a canopy up there above you. Can you talk a little bit about the canopy and what its purpose is to the vines right now?
Totally. So out here in G3, we have a quad trellis system. And the canopy is just kind of to help balance that vegetative growth with your fruit. And so your canopy is also going to offer some shade so you don't get any sunburnt on your cluster. And it's also going to be your source of food for your clusters. So that's kind of where the balance of the vegetative growth comes in. And what Patrick mentioned about hedging is, you don't want your shoots to be super long and tall. You don't want your canopy to be really overgrown. There's like an ideal number of leaves for every shoot. And so it's just about hedging your canopy. That way your fruit can be maximized as much as possible. And so out here in Rutherford, it's it's a quad system, so I'm actually kind of in the middle. So we have 4 basically cordons, or 4 arms, and yeah, it's split, and this just really kind of increases fruit yields while also still giving you a balanced canopy.
Awesome. So this is fun too, because we didn't rehearse this at all with Connor or go into it at all, and so we're just kind of winging this, and it's quite fun, and you know, look out, ladies, he's at the winery most days, and he's gonna be running things for you there. He's this awesome all-star addition to our team. We're really fortunate to have him. And
so Steve, why didn't you say that about Stu or myself? I was just curious. If you would elucidate on that, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah.
You guys
well,
aren't
I did say you looked aged, and and I also think Stu's face mask is quite quaint.
Yeah, it wasn't until we started that I realized I am still wearing my face mask from the winery. I can usually take it off in the vineyard. I practice safe vineyard practice.
It's messing up your camo that you got going with the shirt. So you got a little camouflage thing with the canopy. But I will, if anybody has any further questions, feel free to shake them out. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap things up for us here. And we can all bid our adieu. We will stay on for a few minutes if anybody has any additional questions. It was a bit of an experiment tonight to put 3 guys out in the vineyards, all on cell coverage. And I appreciate my friends and colleagues for braving that. I appreciate all of you online for chiming in. Really quite a kind of a banner list of folks chiming in on this. So we will be exploring the vineyards a lot more. Wine Foundry Wednesdays will return in a couple of weeks. We will be going through raisin. We'll be going through kind of harvest preparations at the winery as well. And this series is all about kind of the insider's look into, as Stu would say, lifting the veil of Oz, or lifting the veil to winemaking Oz. I'm sure I screwed that up somehow, but basically it's, you know, let me show you what's under my veil of Oz. Sorry, Patrick. Thank you for shaking your head.
Let's just leave it at that, if we would. And this is kind of
the 7:30 show is completely different than the 5:30. Please tune in if you're waiting.
Where are we going? Where are we going with this? Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm like,
We will be back in a couple weeks for Wine Foundry Wednesdays. And next Wednesday we do have our Anarchist Wine Co. Inquisitive Sips, where we will be out in the vineyards again, but doing a little bit of a different program. And then we've got our book club coming up. Stu, you want to talk a little bit about that? Wine and More.
Oh, no, I always carry a book with me wherever I go, as you can see. So while we were waiting to get on, I had one of those little fold-out chairs sitting here in the vineyard under 90-degree temps, sitting under the canopy. We're going to be, for our next book, we're going to be doing Wine and War by PD and Don Klastrup. And there they examine kind of like how the French winemakers snake, I'm going to move, how the French winemakers, sorry, got distracted there. That was a little unsettling. How the French winemakers kind of continued their practices when during the Nazi occupation, and like kids were going to classes in Champagne under in the chalk caves. Fascinating story. We hope you can join us for that. And sorry about that little panic mode right there.
No worries. I think is that July 25th, Stu, or am I making that up?
My voice is going to go into an upper register right now, and I think it's actually July 18th. It is a Wednesday in July, 3rd Wednesday in July.
Got it. Thank you. That's a much easier way to remember it, and I apologize for messing that up.
It's okay.
So, folks, thank you very much, and hope you didn't mind our bit of fun we were having at each other's expense. But when technology goes askew, so do we. So wine is meant to be fun, enjoyed, drank, and all of that. Anybody got anything left to say? Patrick, Connor, Stu?
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Hey, everyone, stay safe and let's continue to raise glasses. We look forward to seeing you at the winery when things kind of shift to a different gear.
And for the record, Patrick is parked in his car. he's not driving down the road.
Oh my God!
Raising that glass.
No.
All right, guys, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll stay on for a minute if anybody has any extra questions. Cheers, and be well, stay safe, and be healthy. Thank you.